Hello, everyone. Welcome, listeners, back to Philippa Squared, Parenting by Design. I'm Philippa Scott, and my co-host is Philippa Cox, otherwise known as Pippa Cox, so that we can keep ourselves differentiated and you know who's talking. So I'm Philippa, and we have Pippa. Thank you for joining us. Our guest today is Chloe Mascord, and Chloe is another Sunshine Coast local, and Chloe is an intimacy coach. And so we've invited Chloe on today to talk with us, and I obviously told you all about her in the beginning of the show notes, and you'll read more about her. But we've asked her to come along and talk about intimacy in pregnancy, post-birth, that postpartum period, and then how that it can impact further on for both men and women. So Chloe, please introduce yourselves. Tell us a bit about you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm very excited to be here. So I'm an internationally certified somatic sex coach, intimacy educator and speaker, and I'm the founder of Honey Ed. And very shortly, I'll be launching Honey Ed Intimacy Made Easy, my new podcast. And on that podcast, I'm going to be talking about little bite-sized sex and intimacy tips for time-poor women. And I'm sure you've got many women who listen to the podcast that are time-poor, mums and business owners. So what I work with people on is ways to maintain a strong emotional and physical bond with their partners. And a lot of my clients are mums as well. So how to do that when there's kids in the mix, whether it be during pregnancy or early motherhood, or later down the track even, or people without kids too. So it's about how to maintain that intimacy, not just sexually, but also in relationships as well. And how that can add to people's lives in a really positive way. As well, I spend a lot of time working with clients on how to reestablish confidence in their body, because I know a lot of women struggle with body image in particular after having little ones and reconnecting with themselves again and finding that love for themselves. So that's a bit of what I do.
Amazing. Well, obviously, sorry, Pippa, I know you're going to say something in a minute. One of the reasons we obviously wanted to get you on is because intimacy after childbirth, there's lots of myths around that. There's lots of perceived ideas, and everybody experiences it differently. And so we wanted to kind of talk about what happens and how can it impact, and what are the long-term implications of that? Pippa, what were you going to say, or were you going to say what I said?
No, it's okay. You go ahead, Philippa. You just go right ahead, because that is a bloody amazing question.
Yes. Okay, so let's start with, I think where's a good place to start is around intimacy in general. And I think, we briefly spoke about this when we first jumped on the call, but I want to speak to the audience about it as well, is when we're talking about intimacy, we're not just talking about sexual intercourse, we're talking about intimacy in general, and that encompasses, that emotional closeness, affection, touch, verbal communication, and things like non-sexual forms of intimacy like cuddling, kissing, laying naked next to your partner, and just spending that quality time with each other in that closeness, but not necessarily just sex. So I think it's important to show that we're not just talking to one aspect of connection in relationships, where we're kind of talking about the whole thing.
Absolutely. Look, I've been married for a long time. I've been with my partner for 27 years. And over that time, there have been fluctuations in sexual activity, fluctuations in connection and closeness in other ways. And, certainly post-birth, depending on the mode of birth, even dictated for me how soon I wanted to go back to childbirth. So I was really scared after my Caesar going back to having sexual intercourse. However, I was also equally scared after having had a second-degree tear. Now, when my third daughter was born, and I didn't experience any tearing, it was different again. And I didn't experience any trauma in the perineum for baby number 4 either, but it was different again because I now had 4 children, 6 and under, right? So my energy levels were way different, and I saw other things as sexy. In fact, my husband has this joke, right? So there was this one day, I might have had a couple of sneaky gins, but he cut a mango down from the tree and he caught it, and I was so turned on. And he still laments that we don't have mangoes on our tree. He tries to recapture that moment. Often, it hasn't happened again since. But so it's not something that can necessarily be predicted or repeated. But things that we find sexy will change based on where we're at in our world, right? And what constitutes intimacy for us in that space. So help us, bust some of these myths around, intimacy.
I want to talk to what you've just raised as a topic there first before we move on, because I think it's really important that we understand intimacy on a deeper level. And I think what you're talking to is actually what we like to call responsive desire. So sexual desire in general can be categorized into 2 different types. So responsive desire and spontaneous desire. So responsive desire it often arises when there's like a response to some sort of stimuli, and in this case was cutting a mango off a tree. Or like a situation, and you know what's interesting, I'll find with a lot of my clients is it might be something like your partner doing the dishes. Like that is often something that is quite stimulating for people, especially if that's not as common as we would maybe like. So whereas when we're talking about spontaneous desire, it's like that unprompted craving for sexual activity. And I really don't want to generalize here, but you'll often see spontaneous desire in the beginning of a relationship, or men often are more common to respond to the spontaneous desire. That is normally where they sit. And women can often fall into responsive desire, but not to say that we can't be both or be one or the other. And it can also evolve and change too. So yeah, I think it's important for us to understand it from a terminology perspective as well. So I just liked your sharing about the mango situation, because that's actually a lot more common than what you would think.
Okay, so I'm not just weird. That's good. That's good.
Absolutely. And you know what's beautiful about having this information and inquiring with yourself is once you know what your sexual desire preferences are, or what category you fall into, then you're like, okay, cool, now I know. Now I know what fits in with me, so therefore you can use that as a way to increase desire or to understand it on a deeper level and communicate with your partner.
Yeah, it's interesting because I would have said in my early 20s, because I met my husband when I was 20, right? And in my early 20s, it was very much just a spontaneous desire, right? And I would be the one fanging for it, right? So, and that has changed over the years as my, as I've had to direct my energies into other places and spaces. So, I haven't had the same, we were even talking just before about how much energy it takes to, and mental space it takes to parent teens, right? I've got to remember where they are, when they have to be picked up, who's picking them up, remind them to pick them up. Like there's all this stuff that goes on in the background. So I don't have all this space in my head to be thinking about sexual activity or about intimacy even. I don't even necessarily have the space to be thinking about, well, when is my husband coming home from work? I'm thinking about all the things that are, all the other things that need to be done in the day. Whereas prior to children, I had time to think and ponder and imagine and maybe make plans or whatever. That doesn't occur anymore. So, my lifestyle has changed, and that impacts things too.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what I often notice with, clients that might be going through maybe a little bit of low desire or a little bit of low libido is they'll say, oh, back when we first met, I used to love it when they did this, or I used to love it when they would come up and grab my hips from behind, or, give me a kiss on the cheek or something like that. And that evolves and changes like we do as humans. And I think, regardless of whether or not there's kids in the picture, like we evolve and change, and so do our desires and our preferences as well, and that's okay. And I think there's sometimes a misunderstanding with, is it that I don't want to have intimacy or sex with my partner at this particular moment, or at this, in this time in my life, or am I just over it now? Or is it actually that you're not enjoying the type of intimacy and sex that you're actually having? Because they're obviously very different. It's what used to turn you on maybe doesn't anymore. And maybe you want a deeper connection. And that's what we often find with women, is they're searching for quality in intimacy as opposed to quantity, which is often for men. And so there's this divide between the two where, you're kind of missing the mark. It's like, and I'm being general here with men and women, but that's often the case. So we'll go with that. So with men, quantity, they might say, oh, well, I would rather have, sex 3 times a week or twice a week or even once a week. Whereas a woman might go, well, I don't care about how many times. I just want it to be connected. I want to feel, that my pleasure is important. I want to feel like a priority. I want to feel like we've got the time and space to do it. And it's not in the midst of, dealing with kid stuff, or, my head's in a different space. So it's important to show that there is a distinction between quality and quantity.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, love that. Love that. It's Pippa here, by the way. Hello, Chloe.
Hello.
One of the things that I find really interesting with intimacy, like you mentioned before, that there are so many different types of intimacy, and sexual intimacy is just a branch of the whole gamut of the mango tree, right? And yeah,
Love it.
there's
Love the mango references.
yeah, oh yes. I
I'll
mean,
never live this down.
you won't. I'll be, yeah, particularly in summertime, Christmas time, mangoes. You're enjoying your mangoes, are you? Uh, but talking about when you've been together for a while, and so you've got a man and a woman, or a woman and a woman, or a man and a man, and you've been together for a while, and you've got the kids, and you've got all this energy going out towards maintaining a family and doing all that stuff. Not only that, as you mentioned before, Chloe, you have that disparity with men more often wanting a lot of quantity, and women wanting that connection more, that quality.
Yeah.
Now, once you've been together for a while and you go into bed together, you know what each other smells like, what they feel like, what they're going to do, what their touch feels like. And sometimes that doesn't feel as intimate as it did before the kids, when it was all spontaneous and lovely and the fairy dust is just sprouting all around. So with that analogy, how can you invite intimacy into situations like that?
Absolutely. I love that question. So first I would want to know more context on the situation. And I think it's important to identify whether or not the couple are involved in intimacy and are having sex, and how they feel around it. So is it, I'm not satisfied with the sex that I'm having, or is it quantity, like for both parties, because if it's like, I just don't have I'm not wanting to be intimate with my partner, but I would like to be more intimate with my partner. Yeah, I would start with, and this is what I often do with clients, is I actually start with the individual that I'm working with, unless I'm working with a couple. But even then, I'll get them to identify within themselves what it is that brings them pleasure. Because I think what we often do is what used to, like I was saying before, bring us pleasure now no longer does. So if we start with the individual and doing some exploring, not just sexually, but finding things in life that bring us pleasure, and we start to allow our body to receive pleasure in our day-to-day activities, then we start to feel desire to bring in more pleasure in our lives. And then it might be doing some self-inquiry and finding what feels good. Is it different sensations? Is it different materials on the skin? Is it softness? Is it romance? What is it that I'm looking for in my life? What is it that I would like more of in my relationship, or what I want to feel? And where I think we can also, sometimes get off course because we're never taught this, is once we identify what it is that we want and what feels good in our body, how do we then communicate it back with our partner? Because there's two pieces of the puzzle here. One is actually knowing what we want, because that's often a difficulty. But then it's also, how the hell do we actually communicate that with our partner? Because communication, as I'm sure you would see, between couples is not something we're taught anyway. And then adding sex and intimacy into the mix where people feel uncomfortable to talk about it and then not knowing how to communicate, it's like a double whammy. So I think once there's comfort in communication and comfort in knowing ourselves, the rest flows nicely. And what I love to do with clients is give them scripts of how to actually communicate with their partner what it is that they want, or to even open up a conversation. Because where would we have learned how to start talking about sex, or even where? A lot of people think, oh, I'll bring it up while we're in the midst of it, which is the worst possible time you want to be talking about, intimacy and sex is while you're being intimate, because people are quite sensitive in that space, and they don't want necessarily to hear things that you want more of. They want to know what they're doing right.
Yeah, love that. Love that. And again, it goes down to communication.
Yeah, we're hearing that theme a lot, right?
And we are, that's the theme of today, isn't it, Philippa? And also about opening up your curiosity. So you've got that desire to feel intimate, to be intimate with your partner, because we know if you're intimate with your partner, it deepens and solidifies the relationship. It just takes it to such a different level, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you said curiosity. That's that is just something that is so linked to pleasure and being in the moment and being curious, and coming back to that childlike state that we often drift away from, where we get quite serious in life, and we are so fixated on getting an outcome and very practical, that sometimes we just need to come back and be playful and do a little bit of exploring, whether that be with ourselves or with our partner. It's like, doesn't need to be serious, even though it's such a taboo conversation. It's I remember back to when you first start learning about sex and intimacy and first start getting curious with yourself, it has that element of excitement because it's so unfamiliar and unknown, and we can have that in adult life. And I think that's where you can start to bring some magic back into intimacy in your relationship.
I love that. And magic. Magic, that's a beautiful word, isn't it? Love that.
Often when I'm working with new parents, one of the questions that I get is, I don't know, now that I've overcome my fear, I don't quite know how to get myself back in. I don't know how to take that step to open the lines to say I'm open to this again. And my advice to them is always, generally, to start by being a bit playful. Have some fun. When you first got together, you were having fun together. you were being a bit sassy or cheeky and you were having fun. So the very first step can often be in terms of, you know, breaking the ice. We do icebreakers, right? When we're meeting new people. And very often when we go back to intimacy after having a baby, it can feel like we need an icebreaker, something to just make it easy to step across that line, especially if he's been rejected a few times and, you know, and now she's in a place where she's ready, but she's not feeling confident enough in herself to say, I want you. Sometimes a really easy and calm way to do that is to be a bit sassy and playful, because that's actually who you used to be when you were first, you know, getting together, generally speaking. And it can feel like an easy icebreaker. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we go through in relationships and in life and in intimacy, it's the same. You go through chapters, right? And you can look at the chapter as being, oh, you know, the intimacy has gone from like here to, you know, a different level. And a lot of people look at it in a negative way, in particular after they've got kids. But if you look at it through a lens of positivity and opportunity, where you can actually take your connection and intimacy and relationship and treat it like, let's kind of start fresh, wipe the slate clean, and let's see what we actually want, what is bringing us pleasure at this stage in our relationship, and be a little bit cheeky with it and playful, and have conversations with that lightness rather than it just being so serious, because that takes it starts to really warm up the space of conversation. And that's what we need, is we need to make it soft and, you know, without try not to bring our own insecurities into the mix, which is hard sometimes, I get it. But if we can be playful, you can't be playful and serious at the same time. So it kind of removes that, if we're able to step into that, you know, maybe silliness as well.
Beautiful,
So
love it. And it's also, yeah, go for it, Philippa.
I was going to say, what are some myths that you experience from you know, couples who've just had children or who are early in their parenting journey? Because that's a lot of our audience will be there, although some of them will be years down the track as well. But, you know, what are some of the myths? You know, so one that I get asked often, and I imagine, Pippa, you do too, is how soon after having had a baby can we be intimate? And in my experience with people, I've met women who've gone back 3 days after giving birth to a baby, and holy crap, that would not have been me. And others who are 18 months in, who have not been intimate yet. So there is no rule, but, you know, let's break that myth that there's a particular time, or that there's, you know, that you can't have sex within a particular time. So tell us about your experience there and what you would say to people.
Yeah, I think it is honestly unique to the individual. Like you said, there's people that will be all up for sex a couple of days later, and if their body, and this is the thing that I'm sure you work with women on all the time, is that you know your body. Literally, you know your body. If you're connected to your body and in alignment with your body, you will know when you're comfortable to do that. Obviously, if there's medical things going on that need to be considered, then by all means, follow advice of a medical professional. But what I would say is there are some women that will not feel comfortable to return to intimacy for quite some time. Now, there could be a number of things that are contributing to that, as I'm sure most people know, but, you know, hormones is a big one. That's the one that I often find is the thing that holds women back from leaning into intimacy, because their hormones are out of balance and they just literally don't want to have intimacy. They don't want to have sex. And that's something that, you know, we can absolutely work on. Just because there's no desire there and their hormones are out of balance doesn't mean there's not other ways that we can create intimacy and start to allow the body to feel connection with their partner again as well, because they've just gone through obviously some quite in depth experiences. So hormones is a big one, but it really does depend on the individual. And if it's safe to do so, I don't see why people can't have sex a few days later. I've heard stories about that as well, where it's totally fine and they enjoy it and it's okay, and the woman is safe and she feels good, and that's okay. It's not very common, but it can happen. So
yeah, absolutely. And so body safety is one thing, hormones is another, sleep. Now, this is probably something that that you're going to, because hormones is going to impact you in perimenopause and menopause as well, right? Like there's a whole lot of hormonal shifts that happen later in life too. So this is something that, even if you're dealing with it now post birth, you're possibly going to deal with, or probably going to deal with again later on in your years. And so, being able to understand what tools to use at any point where your hormones are a bit out of whack is going to be useful, right? Because you can use those tools again, because it won't be the first or last time that you'll have a out of whack hormones, right? But sleep is a big thing. Do you does that come up a lot for you? Because postnatally, sleep is a big thing.
yeah, and the individual, it depends. I mean, sleep deprivation is huge. That will be a complete killer for libido for most women. And it just reduces that interest in sex, because there's just so many other things going on for them that they're just not there. But I think it's important, even if sex is not on the table, and that's okay, that there are so many other benefits to having connection with your partner and having intimacy in different ways. And so if somebody was in that situation where it just wasn't an option at that point, and it's, maybe too soon after little ones come into the world, then we would focus on other ways of creating intimacy for the couple. Because what I've found with clients I've worked with, but also with some friends, because I was talking to you the other day, Philippa, around a couple of my friends are 1 year postpartum, two very close friends, and they're saying to me that in their experiences, and some clients as well, they've said, we didn't have conversations about intimacy or things like that. Like, it wasn't something that we spoke about or prioritized, and it's only now that they're prioritizing their relationship. And so there's just so much of a backlog of things that they need to address. And so it's like the communication wasn't there from the beginning, the intimacy in other forms wasn't there. So it's just this layer upon layer upon layer, which we can definitely, by prioritizing communication and finding other ways to have intimacy, is really going to have a positive impact on the relationship. And so non-sexual ways of having intimacy with your partner is just so valuable. And communication is the other thing I would say that is really important to focus on.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And just for people who are listening, who might not know what other forms of intimacy are out there, what would you recommend?
Yeah, so when we're talking about intimacy, we're talking about emotional intimacy. So that's, it builds emotional intimacy is, builds a foundation of trust and understanding in the relationship. Physical intimacy, and we're not talking sexual, we're just talking physical intimacy, is like that tactile connection between the partners. So that might be cuddling, kissing, other forms of intimacy that will help connect, create their bond. Verbal intimacy, so verbalizing to your partner how you feel, also ensuring that your partner feels heard and that you're hearing your partner. Sexual intimacy, which we've spoken about, and then affirming intimacy as well. So that positive reinforcement and appreciation, which is really good for self-esteem as well, when you're hearing from your partner how they feel about you in a positive way and things that they really like about you. It helps. So there's a lot of different ways that you can have intimacy that doesn't directly involve sex.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. That's so beautiful. And again, it's about communication and about voicing your needs,
yeah,
isn't it?
absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, when we're talking to the communication, I think what's really important is that we need to communicate with ourselves first. We need to understand ourselves on the level that, which happens a lot with new mums, is there's a lot of detachment from self because there's so much need to be there for the little one and give everything that they have to little one. And so it's a really good opportunity, whilst a lot of mums will be prompted to give to their partner or to go, oh shit, I've got to do something about this because if I don't, it could impact our relationship. There is so much benefit to us prioritizing ourselves and having these conversations, even if it's just 5 minutes here or there, to reconnect back with ourselves so that we don't lose that detachment. Because what will often happen in relationships is there will be this sense of detachment, but that might be stemming from one of the partners already being detached from themselves. So if we can take ownership and find ways to reconnect to ourselves, then from that, when we can identify where we're at, we can then communicate with our partner and share with them and then find a way to connect with them, because it's really difficult to connect with your partner if you're disconnected from yourself.
Boom. I love that. That is
It comes back to that
awesome.
self-responsibility, doesn't it, Philippa? We talked about that earlier, Pippa, that idea of being in, you know, being self-responsible and about us owning our own stuff. And when we own our own stuff, then we have the capacity to communicate that to others. We have the capacity to take the next step to do what has to be done for our relationship. But there's also, and I think that a lot of mums, and I don't know about you, Pippa, I assume it's the same, we deal with lots of mums who have this sense of, because they're in this giving state, right? They're giving to everybody around them, and they're constantly giving, and they feel, if they don't give to their partner as well, they feel this sense of guilt. And so then often they'll have sexual intimacy out of guilt, because they feel that that's the easiest thing to do, because, well, if I just lay here and suck it up, then at least he's happy for a week or whatever it might be. And that doesn't actually encourage intimacy. That actually eradicates intimacy, because we're doing the thing, but we're not actually experiencing the intimacy that goes with that. But I think that that's actually a really common, you know, and I've been there. I've been in that space where I'm just sick of hearing it. Can we, like, okay, whatever, like, let's, you know, and when you're knee deep in a bunch of young children, it can feel easier to just do the thing than to stand up and say, actually, what I need is this, right? And there can be a mismatch in terms of what they think you're getting from that intimacy because of what they get from that sexual intimacy versus what you actually receive. And so that mismatch sometimes in what we receive from different types of intimacy and how valuable they might be for each of us at different points in our life, you know, can also be a problem. Would you say that you encounter that?
Oh, I have so many feelings about this. So agree completely. And more often than not, sex will be an item on the to-do list with my clients. It will be something they feel they need to do as opposed to enjoy. And where that actually really perpetuates the problem, not only just for the couple that's in this situation, but I'm going to be general here, but for women in general, is sex is not for the man's pleasure. It is for everyone who's involved's pleasure. And when you start to agree to be intimate with your partner for their pleasure, then you're essentially going, I don't matter. And that I really don't like, and I'm very passionate about, because women's pleasure is equally as important as men's pleasure. And we're still trying to break that stigma in society. And unfortunately, in the media that we see in movies and in porn, it's about the man enjoying himself, and the woman's pleasure is misrepresented. And it takes women a lot longer to feel pleasure and to build up and to enjoy intimacy and enjoy sex. And so it's really important not to fall into that trap of just having sex because, it's just easier that way. Because then what will happen is you'll get to a point where it's kind of like, well, I'm not enjoying it, however the sex looks. So it's like, okay, well, then now I have to tackle a conversation, which is, and the man might be saying to themselves, or the other partner might be going, she's enjoying it. and little does he know the whole time you haven't been. And it just creates this dynamic where now you've got to undo it. Now you've got to try to change the direction of this intimacy to create a dynamic where the woman is enjoying it and is really thriving in her pleasure. And then this is why women get to a point where they go, you know what? I don't want sex. It's not important to me. I don't care. Because it's the type of sex that they're having, because they've probably gotten into a bad pattern where they're just having the sex that he wants or the other partner wants. So it's not prioritizing our pleasure. And that's why I say, when you know what brings you pleasure, and then when you come to intimacy, you can communicate what feels good. You can start to try new things so that both parties are enjoying the intimacy and finding a way to do it together, and doing things that are bringing the woman or the man or same sex pleasure at the same time. And it's just really important that we don't start to just have sex because we feel that that's the resolution to the problem, because it's not.
Obligatory versus intimacy, basically. Yeah.
And
And
we deserve pleasure. Like, we deserve to enjoy intimacy, and our pleasure is so important. It's when you have it creates so much life and joy for us as individuals. And
massive.
I think how
And
we get
the
to
one
there
thing,
can be different too, right? Like how we get to there.
yeah,
The getting to a space of, you said it before, women often take longer to get to that space of being ready for sexual pleasure. And maybe it's part of that respondent side of things too, but that other intimacy is sometimes required before that happens. So, for me, I like to be emotionally intimate before physically intimate. Does that make sense? Whereas that's not as required for my husband. I think he feels that innately. Yeah. Pippa, what were you going to say?
Absolutely. The build up.
Yeah, the one thing that I really would like to bring to the table is the cultural differences in sex. I mean, I've worked in a lot of countries where women aren't seemed as sexual beings. They're seemed as vessels for babies.
Yeah. Yeah. Not deemed as it's not about pleasure. It's about
Function.
having children.
Yeah.
I don't think that's exclusive to certain cultures. I think we still experience that in everywhere. I think it's better, but I don't think that there is focus on women's pleasure in sex. Like, and even the pleasure that we do see in women, I'll call it out. I think a lot of it is for the benefit of men, like, where do we see a woman experiencing pleasure in sex?
Yeah, particularly. Yeah.
Born to places where that's not accurate representations of how women experience pleasure. It doesn't take us 5 minutes to experience orgasm. It's on average, it's over 20 minutes, 22 minutes or something like that. And you don't see foreplay in movies or in porn.
Yeah. We could
And
go
that's
down such a rabbit
experience
hole with this
pleasure.
because this is one of my this is one of my pet things, absolute pet things in my in my sex education as well. It's huge, particularly that porn is so available now. If you've got a mobile phone, you've got access to porn, and it's young women are growing up thinking that that's how sex should be, and that
I'll be
is
honest.
making me mad.
Absolutely. I'll be honest. In my early days, like in my 20s, when I was having sex, it was performative. I was performing because that's how I thought. That's what I thought I had to do. Like it was like, how do I show up as a partner in this dynamic? And the only representation of that is, porn and movies and things. It's like you play a role and you're not really experiencing pleasure. And even men do it. Even men are playing a role. And I think we need to come back to tapping into our body and actually experiencing true pleasure and not playing out sex the way that we think it should be, because it's different to everyone, and what we want and what makes us feel good is unique.
Love this, love this. And it goes back to self-awareness, to the curiosity, to the playfulness, to the willingness of going deep with your partner and breaking the ice.
Yeah, 100%.
Love this. Just before we go, I would love you just to touch on sex and intimacy when you're pregnant.
Okay. What do you want to know?
Okay, so when you're looking at some women's libidos go through the roof.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's common. And again, I think, this comes back to hormones as well. For some people, their hormones go one way, for some they go the other, for some that creates more desire for sex. And that's great, roll with it, of course, as long as you're being following medical guidance. Then I say, it's a great opportunity to lean into, that heightened libido. And that absolutely happens. It's quite interesting. In clients I've worked with, they've said 1 minute they're not feeling it, and then literally the next second it's like an extreme impulse of desire for their partner, and it's like they can't. It's out of control, and that's cool. That's a really cool way to like lean into this playfulness that we're talking about, and fun, and you can make it light and just roll with it and say, oh, here we go, and have your little saying that you have together where you're getting that urge to be intimate with them, and make it fun, make it an opportunity to have a deeper connection with your partner and be playful.
Love that, love that. And if you look at it from like a really huge perspective, that when women and men in a relationship have that increase of intimacy when they're pregnant, doesn't it really help with the formation of the family on the other side?
And I'm
It
sure
really
the child
does.
can feel that. I'm sure the child can feel that connection between the parents too. Like it's all it all flows down and through, and sex and intimacy is a beautiful way to have that connection with your partner, and I'm sure that it's passed through in our cells, in our being, and a really good start to also, once you become new parents as well, to have that connection going into the early stages of parenthood is really powerful as well, because that's a challenging time. So any way that you can create more connection in your relationship prior to those challenging couple of months there, it's all beneficial.
I think
Absolutely,
that's
absolutely.
the thing too. There is, it's about the connection. It's because if you've got a woman who's got morning sickness for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks on end, she is not feeling sexy, right? But there are that's where we rely. Then we fall back to the other ways to create intimacy, as opposed to it just being about sexual intimacy. Because if you've got someone with hyperemesis who is violently sick from the minute they conceive to the day they give birth, she's not going, you like, obviously we don't want to create this idea of guilt again about not being able to put themselves into that intimacy space. And I'd love to, I think this might actually, Pippa, be a topic for another day, but it would be great to perhaps even have a conversation around how, you know, the journey to conceive, and when couples have problems conceiving and they start to have sex in a perfunctory way, how that can impact fertility. So, you know, there are so many, it comes back to so many parts of our lives. Yes. Yeah, but sex has always been transactional in many ways, right? It's the oldest profession, right? Is sex for something.
Yeah, and that goes hand in hand with midwifery because one follows the other.
Yes, well, that's true too.
I always used to say, I'm always in a job. As long as someone has sex, I'm in a job.
Actually, no, the other way. Often. We can work together. We can work together.
Thank you so much, Chloe. You know, I'd love for you to tell people how they can get in touch with you, what you have to offer. And we'll obviously put the links in the show notes, but please tell people how they can work with you and what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So a great place to reach out and just start a conversation with me is on Instagram. You'll find me at thehoneyed.official. Please feel free to send me a DM and have a bit of a chat. I know that in this space it is quite sensitive topics, so I'm more than happy to start a little chat with you there. Otherwise, you can also reach me on my website, www.honey-ed.com. And I also have a free guide for anyone that's finding that their libido has dropped away a little bit. My free guide is to reignite your libido in just 15 minutes a day, because I know that we're all very time poor. So important to keep it to a minimum investment of time. And you can get that freebie at www.honey-ed.com/freebie, but I'm sure you'll list that in the show notes anyway.
Please, yes, absolutely we will. Absolutely we will. Amazing. Well, it has been such a pleasure, and we really hope that the listeners, that you've gotten something out of this, whether that's you know, being able to take the monkey off your back and not feel the guilt, or whether that's a new way to reignite the spark, or whether it's just some things that you need to do to plan for the future so that you know how to avoid some of the common things that happen. So please follow along with Philippa Squared. We'd love you to, you know, be made aware when new episodes come along, because we have so many incredible guests coming for you, people just like Chloe. And if you haven't listened to all the past episodes, please go back and have a listen, because we've had some incredible different experts as well. So yeah, follow along. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Chloe, thank you again. Pippa, thank you as always for being an incredible co-host. We look forward to speaking to you all again.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chloe. It was a really nice conversation.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was a blast.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.